and welcome to Grace Found Me once again. I'm so blessed to be here, and I'm so honored by your presence here. I want to thank you for making time to watch these videos, or making time in watching these videos. Last time we spoke about how Lot found grace before the Lord, and that grace brought about his salvation. Today we are continuing in the same spirit of grace, but this time on the topic of, can God use me? These are some of the questions that we mostly ask ourselves all the time. That can I be used by God? This is one big question that almost every single person asks himself on this planet. And when you ask yourself this question, there is only one thing that comes to mind, and that is purpose. Purpose. Let me write it in capital letters. Purpose. Purpose. You see, the question is, what on earth are we doing here? And why are we here in the first place? And can God even use us? Can God even use me? These are some questions that I ask myself sometimes. Can God use me? Am I qualified enough to be used by God? You see, I chose this particular picture as you see over here. And this picture is the last pictures that was taken by Voyager 1 as it was leaving our spheres, or as it was leaving the reaches of the sun and going into the unknowns of the universe. And if you can see this picture very well, you can see that there is a small spot over here that is glowing, and it stands out. It stands out from among all the grayness around it. Now, all the grays that you see are over here, they represent planets, they represent asteroids, they represent heavenly bodies. But you can see that as there are so many grays all over around it, there is this spot that stands out. And this spot, as we see over here, is the earth. This is how the earth looks like. And the reason why earth looks so standing or outstanding out of the blue, or out of all the surroundings, is because earth is unique. And so any other creature that should be outside of these spheres could easily locate earth, because earth stands out from among all the planets. And you see, this is how God sees you. This, let me write it here, this is how God sees you. God sees you unique. God sees you among all the 8 billion people on this planet. God sees you as that glowing light. God sees you as that unique person among the multitude. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11, he said that, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and plans to give you hope and a future." So if you look at this thing very well, God says that He knows the plans. So God's plans for us is that plans to prosper us. To prosper us. And a plans to not harm us. Not harm us. And also plans to give us hope. Give us hope and future. Oh, this is so wonderful. And future. You see? So, anytime God sees you as a unique person. But then, the question is, how can God use us? You see, God can use anybody. Let me write this. God can use anyone. Anyone. God can use you, and God can use anyone. But the question that comes to mind, the big question that comes to mind is how? How will God use you and me? You see, one of the problems we have as people is that sometimes when we want to know what God wants to use us for, we want to know how God will use us in the plans that we already have in our minds. And so we ask ourselves, God, how can I be this person? How can I be what you want me to be? See, the moment you talk about I, the God factor is cancelled out. The God factor is cancelled out. The question I think we should be asking ourselves is, you. How can you use me? And this you over here represents God. How can God use me? You see, and that is why today our focus is on how God can use us. And I'm going to use Timothy as our starting point to study about how God can use us. You see, so there could be so many examples in the Bible, and you might be wondering why Timothy of all people. I could have chosen to use Ruth and Naomi, but God was speaking to me about using Timothy as an example, and using Timothy to open our eyes to certain aspects of how God can still use us in a way that we cannot even imagine. Now, we have Timothy over here. Timothy, a very simple background is that Timothy, the mother of Timothy, was a Jew. Alright? And the name was Eunice. Alright? She later, however, became a Jewish Christian. She wasn't a Christian from the beginning, but later on became a Christian. You know, a Jews and Christian are two different, if we want to put it this way. Jews mostly believe in Judaism, and so there's the possibility of her not being a Christian at a younger age were very high, you see, and she became a Christian at some point in her life. But then Timothy's father was a Greek. Interesting. The interesting thing about this is that Jews and Greeks have two different opinions about salvation. And so the possible conflict that could be arising from this particular marriage will be the conflict of doctrine and circumcision. You see, according to the Jews, and even in the Bible, circumcision, let me use C, was the act for salvation and acceptance. But to the Greeks, let me use G, circumcision was something you cannot think about. It's so horrific because it spills blood. Circumcision spills blood, and it also causes pain. So to the Jews or to the Greeks, circumcision was something unacceptable. And that was the reason why Moses couldn't circumcise his children, and God was angry with him. And it took Moses' wife to circumcise the kids in order for Moses' life to be spared. And so you could see over here that from the onset, Timothy wasn't from a very strong or unified Christian background. He came from a background of both Jews and Greeks. And I believe most of us come from similar families. Maybe our parents are not even Christians, or maybe our mom is a Christian and our dad is not. If you look at the picture over here, Paul was born here in Tarsus, and Timothy was born over here in Lycia. But it took Paul's evangelism for Timothy to be a Christian. It took Paul's evangelism for Timothy to be a Christian. When Paul first met Timothy, Timothy was 33 years. So Paul was by then 48 years. Let me put it this way. Paul was 48 years and Timothy was 33 years when they met. And it is believed that Timothy became a Christian after he met Paul. But how did God use Timothy? That we can learn from today. How did God use Timothy that we can learn as a lesson today? Now, the first thing I want to talk about is that Timothy wasn't a perfect man. Timothy's profession was, he ended up becoming a pastor. So if you look at Timothy, Timothy became a pastor of the church. Pastor of the church. That was Timothy's assignment, or that was Timothy's occupation. But do you know that Timothy had some weaknesses? Yes, Timothy had some weaknesses. Now, let's look at some of the weaknesses of Timothy. So if you take Timothy was, number one, he was timid. Timothy was timid, and also he was very reserved. He was very reserved. The second thing about, or the other weakness about Timothy was that he was someone who easily allowed people to look down, allow others, let me put it this way, allow others to look down on him. The third thing is that Timothy was apparently unable to correct some of the problems in the church. So in leadership, Timothy was a failure. You see, I was a shy person myself, and I still am. And the same thing applies to Timothy. I know some of you might even be shy and may have so many weaknesses that make you think that you cannot even be used by God. But inasmuch as Timothy was a timid person and reserved and couldn't even solve the problems of the church, how then did God use him? You see, this is how God used Timothy. God didn't solve the problems of Timothy's weakness. That is number one lesson you can learn from this. That one, God didn't heal Timothy of his weakness. That is number one lesson I want you to learn today. So, as we can see, God did not, let me put this here. God did not heal Timothy of his weakness. And that shouldn't be a surprise to us, because Paul also had weaknesses. But what God told Paul was this, that in your weaknesses, I, the Lord, has perfected my strength. So God told Paul that in your weakness, I, the Lord, have perfected my strength. See, God says, in your weaknesses, I have perfected my strength. And that was the same reason why God didn't heal Timothy of his timidness or his timidity. God didn't heal him of his reserved nature. God didn't heal him of him allowing others to look down on him. But what did God do? What God did was this. Let me write here. What did God do? What did God do? Good. Number one, God used Paul. So God used Paul to address all of Timothy's problems. God used Paul to address all of Timothy's problems in order for us to learn about leadership. In order for us to learn about leadership. And so, this is one big thing that God did with Timothy. God took Timothy and all his weaknesses and made Paul address all of Timothy's weaknesses in order for us to learn from it. Bible says that for the scriptures are written first. So this is Paul used by God to help Timothy in order for us, so we can learn. Bible says that for all scriptures are God-breathed, and they are for our instruction, for our correction. Alright? All scriptures are God-breathed. Let me put it this way. All scriptures are God's breath. For what? For our instruction. For our instruction. In this lesson, this means that we don't necessarily have to be successful people to be used by God. In God's mind, Timothy was just supposed to be a failure. And as we speak today, Timothy has a book written in his name in the Bible. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this? So we don't necessarily have to be successful from human terms. We don't need to be successful. To be used by God, to be used. To be used by God. In God's mind, Timothy was a lesson to everybody. And that is how God wanted to use Timothy. So that we, you and I, can learn from it. You see, when people think of God using them, all they think about is that God will make us successful. Now, these are the perceptions of people, that if God wants to use us, if God wants to use us, one, we have to be famous. It means that when God uses you, you have to be famous. Of course, God can make you famous, but God will make you famous, just like He did with Timothy. Even though he failed as a church leader, he failed miserably. He can't even speak in front of people. But Timothy is a book right now in the Bible. Alright, so the lesson I want us to learn today is this: that God can use us. God can use anyone. God can use anyone. But how? How? The advice I will give to you is that avail yourself. Be ready for anything. Advice is this: that be ready. Be ready for anything. Anything. Because God can use you in any way. Because God can use you. Can use you in any way He wishes. God bless you. And if this video has been a blessing to you, I want you to share it with friends. Share it with friends. Share it and also subscribe. Subscribe to the channel. God bless you and stay blessed.